So what's wrong with the Pharisee's prayer? He's a good man who does more than the religious obligation requires of him. He observes the evils of the world around him and then gives thanks to God that he's not a part of it. What's more, he thanks God for his good behavior and his upright life. Why, he even exceeds the religious demands of the first century Judaism. His prayer sounds okay. He's a good man thanking God for his good behavior. So what's the problem? Well, you know that famous real estate quote? There are three things that count in real estate: location, location, location. Well, we can apply a similar guide to the two characters in today's parable. Location is a clue to what's happening. Notice where the Pharisee and the tax collector are located as they pray. The Pharisee goes to the temple, but he isn't there praying with the community. He's by himself, praying prayers in the first person singular. His prayer is full of I's. I am not. I fast. I pay tithes. He has not come to be with and pray with his Jewish brothers. He is not praying for his community or for those in need. He is detached from everyone else. He's taken up his position, and it's not a place that includes others, like the needy or the sick and sinners and outcasts. He's crediting God for his wonderful life, but curiously, the prayer's focus is on himself, not God. God really doesn't play any part in his life. He doesn't need God at all to be the outstanding, recognized religious leader that he believes he is. Now, the tax collector's location is also apart from others, but for a different reason. He would have been despised by his community. After all, tax collectors were Jewish men who made their living, and a very comfortable living, I might add, raising taxes from the Jews to the Romans. But note his grammar. He is not praying in the first person singular, I. He's not the subject of this prayer. God is. God is doing the work. He is the recipient of God's mercy. O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He's not focusing on his actions, good or bad. He is trusting in God's mercy. He is the object. Jesus praises the tax collector's humility because he knows himself. He doesn't pretend to be anything other than himself. He relies on God to do for him what he cannot do for himself. He can't claim mercy based on his own merits, but he can ask for it. And why? Because he needs it. And he trusts that God will give it to him. Now, Jesus' listeners, they would have been shocked by this parable, because they would have held the Pharisee in very high regard because of the evidence of his life. But the parable presents our proper relationship before God, not merited by any human action, however grand, but it is based on God's merciful gift. This parable is really a cautionary tale for religious people, especially those of us in public ministry, ordained or the laity. We have to be aware of our own spiritual poverty. In our service to others in need, we might sometimes set ourselves apart from them, and that's not a good location for a disciple of the one who kept company and ate with sinners. The love of God which we profess, that can sometimes turn into self-love. We can look upon the gifts that we have received from God as rewards for our behavior. And like the Pharisee, our prayer can easily become a boast. When the Pharisee left the temple that day, he might have felt satisfied, but he certainly wasn't any different from the person that he was when he entered and began that prayer. His prayer was not an openness to God and the change that God might want to bring about in him. He may have felt content when he left the temple that day, but his prayer did not result in any growth in his relationship with God. But the tax collector, he left changed by God's grace. Those of us who might feel our location is apart from the upright members of this church because we are newcomers, or divorced, or gay, or unemployed, or poor, or racially and ethnically apart, we need to hear Jesus' words about the tax collector. We might not always experience our worth in this community, but Jesus reminds us of our worth before God. The humble will be exalted, he says. As a church community, we need to remember Jesus' words as we look around at the folks who are physically or socially in the back of our temple, those who are in the back pews of our local community. Do you notice St. Paul's location? He's writing to his disciple Timothy from prison. He's anticipating his death. He was ejected, abandoned by his companions. His trust in God isn't based on his own merits, but on the Lord, who, he says, will rescue me from every evil threat and bring me safe to his heavenly kingdom. Like the tax collector, Paul is not the subject of that sentence. He is the object. He is the recipient of Christ's graciousness. Paul has chosen the right location. He is on the receiving end of God's graciousness, and he knows it. And for that, he continually praises God. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness. Now, the English word righteousness has a negative sound to it. We don't like people who are self-righteous, like the Pharisee. But in the Bible, a righteous person was someone who is in right relations with God. Isn't that what we want? Paul is anticipating the crown of righteousness that awaits him. A righteous person has been faithful to the covenant. Paul credits his righteousness not from any work he can take credit for, but from his faith in Jesus. It is that faith that makes him righteous. He knows that it is a gift from God, and so he is not self-righteous. In the parable, who turns out to be righteous or just in God's eyes? It is a tax collector. who is in right relationship with God. Not because of any work that he has done, like the Pharisees fasting and tithing, but rather because of God's gift. And that's a gift that he did nothing to earn.